I'm not going to be able. Okay, there we go. Good job.
Yeah, good morning. Morning. Uh, Glad to have you on. We are back with the DAACATs. Took a week off there, and so wanted to get back into the routine, but we do have myself, Jim McDermott, and Paige Thompson out in the field, not just a false backdrop. And for some reason, you needed a hat and a coat this morning, Paige.
Well, it is a little chilly, low 50s. It's a little dewy out here. Not used to this yet, Jim. We had some pretty warm temps there for a while.
Yeah, we definitely are not used to it. And hopefully we don't have too much of the cold stuff here for a while, but that's one of the agenda items we'll talk about. Fun time of the year, though, and like our lead-in slide has some ear boards, and I really love being able to start looking at ears and start looking at what's taking place in the field as far as ear fill and possibly even yield potential. And we do have some silage choppers running and some yield estimates started, so it is getting real exciting. So, as usual, the agenda pretty much right on top of what we usually talk about, current topics. We'll start with the trivia question. So, diseases in soybeans, particularly sudden death syndrome, that's been showing up a little bit this year. But the question is, what type of environmental situations or what type of field situations do we tend to see SDS show up more often?
Put it in the chat.
Yep. Fairly straightforward. There's several different things that have a lot to do with that, and I think we've got an answer from Peter Buchan right away. Yes, we've got cold, wet soils in the spring. So Peter is our winner for this week's trivia question. A lot of different answers could fit into this. That's really the main one, but yeah, SDS, no question. The early planting, which there certainly was a fair amount of compaction. Of course, usually that's where we're first going to see it. So soybean cyst nematode, of course, and allow that fusarium fungi to get into the roots. Wetter conditions, of course, poor drainage. You could also throw in variety susceptibility. And there's probably some other factors. Sometimes stress on top of stress or some of the other stresses will allow SDS to be more serious. So that is our trivia question for this morning. And we'll talk a little bit more about SDS as well as some other soybean diseases as we go on down the road here. So looking at GDU accumulation, and since I am in Hull this morning, I picked Hull as our site. So looking at GDUs from several different planting dates, slightly ahead from the April and even the mid-May planting dates, but slight is, that's considered a day or two, so not a big difference compared to the long-term average. But we are getting far enough along. We're starting to get closer to the projections on black layer being somewhat accurate. But for 100-day hybrid planted mid-April, we're within basically 10 days to 2 weeks of black layer. And then you can see the frost risk there too, as far as a chance of first freeze, which for this location is the 9th of October on average. Project out to the middle of May. Well, that's starting to get into October. Still relatively small risk of frost hitting before black layer. But then the June planting dates, and of course it's always a little bit of a wild card. And as you get into projections, they're not as accurate. So mainly looking at 65 days after the silking date. Usually it's 60 plus or minus 5. Went to the conservative side and added 65, especially since we are a little bit cooler than normal after our silking dates, which is good as far as air fill. but also is pushing that date back to the 65 after our silking. But I guess that puts it around the 10th of, or excuse me, the 12th of October. So about a flip of a coin whether that's going to make it. I would say hopefully there's a chance. Again, if we're closer to 60 days versus 65, that gives us a little bit of leeway. Maybe gives us a better than a 50% chance. What's it look like there? How far along is the corn at the site that you're at, Paige?
Yeah, so I'm in an area where we did experience quite a bit of that moisture piece early on and through May. So we're beginning dent here. It's a May 30th planting date in that Palo Alto County area. So got a little ways to go. And if you go to that next slide, as far as talking about ear fill and everything, so you look at beginning dent. So we have a little bit to go until physiological maturity. And we still think about moisture also, about 6.1 inches needed to reach that maturity. We've gotten some nice shots here or there the past couple of weeks, but yeah, about 60 to 75% the yield attained in this particular field. But those other ones, as far as, looking at the other planting dates, definitely a little further along.
Well, at least on that later May planting date, we've got the dent started. So that's a good thing, especially when we talk about some of the diseases that are out there and how much more damage they can do. But yeah, still some yield to be attained, and hopefully the areas that you're at, you've got some moisture last Thursday, because that was a key one to help finish out both corn and soybeans.
Oh yeah.
And then speaking of frost, do have to bring up the F word, but hopefully nobody's in a real high risk here for the next few weeks. And it looks like we get past this weekend, and I at least on the forecast that I was looking at, there wasn't much of a chance of frost for quite a while yet. But if we are, say, in that dent stage, starting to see that dent and the starch lines not moving down, we still have that potential of 10 to 20% yield reduction. Once we get to point where we're mid dent or that starch line's coming down, of course, then our yield reduction drops pretty drastically. But hopefully not something we have to worry about, but felt I had to bring it up since I knew Paige would be in a stocking hat.
Yeah.
So on the soybean side, plenty of work to do here. Of course, we know how much yield is gained late season on soybeans. We've got a lot of fields that are in R6, where we've got that seed is filling the pod cavity and in the upper four nodes. At that point, we still have between 20 and 30% of the yield to be attained. So that seed size, of course, makes up so much difference, which is why it was so critical to get some moisture. So again, hopefully your area received a good shot last Thursday. Just really the 3.5 to 4.5 inches of moisture to finish it out, even when we're at R6. And then on the frost side there too, some pretty wide ranges on soybeans. Partly because there can be effect on seed size, but even at R6, you can say up to 50% yield loss. To me, that would be to the extreme at an R6 stage, but shows the potential. Once we're starting to get through seed fill and we're starting to see a little bit of color change, we still have the potential to hurt that seed size mainly. And this is one of your freezes that you're talking 28 degrees, 4 hours, and you're just shutting off any sort of pod fill at that point. And even at R7, when we're getting to physiological maturity, we're basically safe, but there can be, if there's some top clusters that are still trying to fill, we can cut into some yield potential at that point. So how about some things going on out in the field, Paige? Some things that are a little bit unusual that we don't see too much anymore.
Yeah. it is interesting week to week as far as certain pictures that get texted or sent. Um, got this the other day. So yeah, if you can look at the red dot there, it's a shot hole is what I call it. So there has been some European corn borers, in those areas that have a little bit more conventional corn. So like I said, you can tell as far as the shot hole in the leaves, you can tell as far as the burrowing in the stalks, and it looks like sawdust that comes out of it right there. But it shuts down that top part of the plant. And I tell you what, Jim, um, gonna age myself here. There's been a long time since I've seen European corn borer. Back in '98, when I was doing some crop scouting in high school, um, did find a lot of it back then, but it's been a while.
Yeah, yeah, I don't have to worry about aging myself because I know I'm old, but yeah, I was definitely with DEKALB when BT corn came out, and of course it was a dramatic change. And we don't think about it too much because it's a high dose BT expression, does very well on taking care of corn borer, and we've reduced the overall pressure. But certain pockets, certain areas have more conventional corn out there. Um, so there are some fields that still get hit. Fortunately, it's not anything we have to concern ourselves in the big picture. But
Right.
I've had a call or two this year as well on corn borer.
And tar spot, that's been a hot topic lately. I'd say a couple of weeks ago, the pictures really started ramping up, but it didn't transpire into anything. It was just, some black stomata showing up here or there on some leaves. You couldn't find it on every plant. The past few years, I've been able to find it in every single county in my territory, but it's come in late, or if it did come in, it just didn't have all the right things that it needed to really turn into anything. But we're getting to that point where we can probably breathe and not have to worry about it too much.
Mhm. Yeah, other than maybe some June planted corn, but yeah, really, for the most part, it's been interesting to watch, but hasn't done a lot, which I think kind of surprised both of us for as early as we were seeing it, and for the environmental conditions that we had. Relatively cool, dews, moisture, but where I'm seeing it, which is most counties as well, it's staying in the lower part of the canopy. Once in a while, I'll see some leaves that are getting completely lit up, but very few cases am I seeing it above the ear leaf. Certainly some out there, but especially once we start to get that corn dented, most of these diseases are really not going to affect us on the ear fill part. Worthwhile watching on standability, not only with tar spot, but of course we've been talking about southern rust and common rust. Some of the other diseases that are present, they can all cut into standability just by reducing some of the plant health here late season. And speaking of tar spot, I guess as far as hybrids, we've got a few listed here that you want to keep an eye on. If you had some tar spot present, just be aware of the hybrids that have a little more susceptibility. The 5125, 5218 family would be one. 5665, I would say it's on the borderline, but officially in the below tolerance for the categories. And then 10733, 6269, definitely a couple of hybrids to keep your eye on. Again, if you're dealing with some tar spot coming in late, and those are ones that can be affected more than other hybrids in our lineup. And then good old Goss's wilt, relatively mild case here with the picture I took yesterday, but Goss's wilt, boy, the last several years is just pretty consistent the way it shows up. Again, tends to be late season, but there's some fields that are starting to get lit up pretty good. And of course, you tend to see Goss's wilt in that upper part of the canopy. So if you do have some ear fill yet to go, it potentially is cutting into that photosynthetic factory and interfering with sunlight capture, as well as the potential on the standability concerns.
Isoderma has been one that I've been getting a lot of calls on, and I know you probably can't see this that well, but this is actually Physoderma brown spot on the corn leaves, and that picture is Physoderma node break. It's just starting to get going. And, you know, something like that, the plant is still pretty vulnerable as far as when doing push tests. That one did pop off pretty easily. So I think it's going to be very important to do those push tests this year, you know, with that heavy moisture that we've had and the conditions. Definitely want to watch that. So Physoderma, um, you know, it comes in early around that V5 time frame in the corn. Like I said, with those storms that we had, a lot of rain splashing that dirt in the whirl, that's when it gets going, but we don't see it later on. Um, but just because we have the Physoderma brown spot doesn't always mean we're going to see the node breakage, but it's definitely something to keep in the back of your mind. And when you're out scouting fields and making harvest plans, keep an eye out on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a fair amount of it. You know, I haven't seen many fields where the stalks have proactively broke. In other words, not,
Yeah.
you know, and once we push them over, then we can find these rotted nodes, but I haven't seen much that's already broken. And it does tend to get a little better as far as the stalk brittleness. You know, once we start to actually have that plant die down, then as you push it, it maybe doesn't snap just because you lose some of that turgor pressure within your plant as it starts to die down. So that is a good thing when it comes to Physoderma. We don't really have what I would say real good hybrid ratings. You know, we used to have some very susceptible hybrids. They've pretty well been eliminated from the lineup. You know, there's certainly some differences among hybrids, no question, but it's I guess a hit and miss disease that it's hard to get real solid ratings on.
Been a big aphid year, Jim. I mean, aphids in corn, aphids in soybeans, and in this situation, you can see that. Got to look real close. You can see that aphid residue there. You can see the aphid castings and whatnot, but you know that sooty mold starts to begin from that sap. In this particular situation, it was pretty much on all the leaves below the ear. You know, we don't really get concerned with aphids typically until it's like on the ear or on the tassel, but I think we're going to have to really evaluate these fields also because in this situation, the plants were starting to kink over around that ear area. And I just think that, you know, as far as that sooty mold and some secondary molds coming in, it just kind of overtook that plant photosynthesis and kind of was starting to shut things down, as you can see from those leaves. We had a ways to go in this field, so definitely going to have to watch these situations.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to what we were talking about diseases. You know, it just may not be affecting much on the yield, but you're still hurting that plant and certainly can affect standability even with the aphid feeding kept in the lower part of the canopy. And just speaking of standability, I guess you know, this is our list of hybrids that we'd like to keep an eye on. You know, certainly hybrids that have been very successful and planted on a lot of acres, but they tend to be a little bit more cannibalistic in nature. And we'll talk about the nitrogen piece here in a second, but this list is hybrids I would keep an eye on. You know, 10733 just being a little bit more offensive. 10864, brand new one. Stock quality is actually good. Stay green, pretty decent, but has some of the Fusarium crown rot susceptibility. So that's the main reason it's on this list. And then on the nitrogen side, you know, we've certainly have a lot of fields where they've been yellow since June, or, you know, at certain stages they were yellow during the growth. And they really are you know, starting to show, I mean, very common scenario. And there's bound to be a little bit of this depending on your growth stage, but I'm seeing a number of fields where even before dent, or just as we're just starting to dent, before we're bringing that starch line down, we've got a lot of firing. Some of it's drought-induced nitrogen deficiency as well, but there's a lot of fields where we're starting to cannibalize, and if we're running out of nitrogen, you know, we're gonna take what we have in the stalk and the leaves and feed it into that ear. So this list, especially as the hybrids, to keep an eye on for those situations. 101-33, new enough. We don't have a lot of years of data, but it's a little bit more offensive in nature. So it's one that does seem to respond to nitrogen. And then again, 57 or 107-33, and then 59, 81, and 82. Enough years of experience with that genetic family that we know it sacrifices stalk quality to fill out that ear. We just have to be aware of those fields if they've been yellowed throughout the season. And on the fuller season side, the 62-70, 62-69 family, and 63-90, 91, certainly ones that do like that nitrogen and will be hurt if we've got a shortage of N here late season. How about on the soybean side, Paige?
Yeah. So this particular situation is a really random one that we don't see very often. I have been finding it in a few fields here or there. It's called soybean vein necrosis virus. Kind of starts to yellow up there in between the veins. It can kind of confuse people as far as maybe it looks like a little potassium, maybe it looks like SDS starting. But in this particular situation, it's soybean vein necrosis virus, and it's actually vectored by thrips. And again, not a common one, but something that I've been seeing this year.
Yeah, we're kind of getting to that point where we've got a lot of diseases that can tend to look like, especially SDS. Sometimes things get blamed on SDS, and they're not always SDS, but have similar symptoms. And, for the record, I feel like I need to point out, yes, this is your hand and not mine holding that soybean leaf.
Oh, I thought you painted your nails.
So on the SDS side, of course, there is plenty, and that's part of the reason we had it as a trivia question. But, again, fairly obvious in a year like this with some of the wetter conditions early as well as late season, and then knowing that we also had some compaction, but that typical yellowing leading into browning necrosis. And sometimes it's tough to see, but once in a while you'll see that bluish fungi down on the roots as well. And of course, soybean cyst nematode, if we've got feeding, we're just making that plant so much more susceptible to SDS. Another one that's a little bit more rare and kind of a disease, but still sometimes this one is not real well understood. Soybean top dieback will look like potassium deficiency with that yellowing on the margin of the leaves. It's normally, though, on the upper part of the plant, which potassium deficiency, you tend to think lower part of the plant, but it's not real well understood, but there does seem to be a component of lack of potassium that can contribute. But it's pretty well thought that the soybean top dieback itself is tied very closely into the diaporthia complex, like the stem canker, southern stem canker. But still, it's a little bit more of an odd disease, but you look at a field like this, there's a lot of fields that have this look. Some of it's natural maturity, some of it's SDS, some of it's even some other things going on. But that's why we encourage you to take a look, try to figure out exactly what's going on, just to help down the road if we need to make a variety selection change, or if we need to do something different in some of these areas. So important to figure out exactly what disease you have. Paige, we are at the point where we're getting to the spotlight product of the session.
Yeah, 5626 Tercepta. Jim, this one has been really, really good for us the past couple of years. I like, as far as the drought tolerance on it, it comes from both sides of the pedigree. This year, we've had plenty of moisture and is looking phenomenal. So I don't know, it's great on tar spot. The roots and stalks are super. It is one of those that is quick to dry down. And I'd say one caution in areas that have Goss's wilt, but definitely a high yielding Tercepta hybrid, strong performance the past few years. Going out in the field, it just looks like regular corn, and it hasn't disappointed. So excited to see what we find in a different type of environment as far as weather environment than the past couple years.
Mhm. Yeah, I sure like this hybrid too. It's one that got a little bit overlooked. First year out, we're somewhat limited on plot seed, but boy, it's performed very well, and we've been able to test it in some droughty conditions the last 2 years, well, since it's been out, and has performed very well. But like you mentioned, it doesn't have a lot of stay green or that late season plant health. Does have a little quicker dry down, so comes in more like a 104, 105 day hybrid. So you do want to keep that in mind. But the overall disease package is good, other than that Gossa's wilt. But as a Tricepta, we're going to keep it in rotated acres, so that helps certainly minimize the risk on the Gossa's wilt side. But then a fun one to have as a complement in here. We've got a lot of solid products. The 10533, which the last time we did a DAACAT was the Spotlight product, and of course 5665 still a key one. And then we jump up to the 10733 and 10864 and a new 10817. So kind of a crowded maturity, but a good problem to have. But each hybrid has their strengths and has their fits.
Yes.
Well, with that, I'm going to get to the last slide. So we've got the QR code up here for the half credit and crop management CEUs. So take advantage of that if you're a CCA. If you're not a CCA, consider getting it.
Yes.
So leave it at that. So that's where we're at as far as our slides. I guess, Paige, anything else? I know you talked a little bit about the plot that you've got there behind you, but anything else you want to add?
No, I was just looking at things. Like I said, it's a later planted plot. It did get a shot of fungicide, and this one was heavy pressure. It's corn on corn, heavy pressure last year with corn rootworm, and they did do 2 shots of insecticide. And I don't doubt, I've been getting a lot of questions on the corn rootworm piece. I don't doubt we did drown some out. We did have some vulnerable times when the corn rootworm were in that larval stage. We can't drown out the eggs, but I can't really find too many rootworm beetles out here. But I did some extensive digging out here because I did throw in some VT4. There's Smart Stacks Pro, and there's Vorseed out here also. And I did find in the Smart Stacks Pro very little feeding, a little more feeding on the VT4 in the Vorseed and Smart Stacks, but nothing that would have even come close to rating on the node injury score. But there was activity, so keep your guard up still with corn rootworm, super important. But some other things that I found out here, just an abiotic stress, as far as been finding a lot of so sun scald, and of course been talking a lot about southern rust. I can find quite a bit of separation from those fields that might have a little more susceptible hybrid with southern rust and that did not get a fungicide. And then also a little bit of northern out here. See that, but yeah, fungicides. I think we're going to see some good things out of them this year. Some big differences, is my opinion. So that's all I got. And yeah, just keep scouting the fields, know what's out in your growers' fields, and be safe.
Yeah, well, good stuff to see it up close and personal. Yeah, and on the fungicide comment, I've heard that from a few people and seen it myself. Certainly you can still find diseases where fungicide has been sprayed, but this is one of the heavier disease years that I can remember, and it does seem like there's separation between the fields that did get fungicide. So it'll be interesting to see how that follows through as far as yield or standability. But that's unfortunately, there's a number of fields in some areas with a lot of water damage that didn't get sprayed with a fungicide. So we've got a little bit more risk out there going into this fall.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at 8:30. So unless there are questions or comments from the group, we are wrapped up for this edition of the DAACAT. And that will allow Paige to get a fire going or get warmed up again somewhere.
I know. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being on. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Take care.